Welcome everybody to this webinar today, focusing on getting trees in the ground. So we've moved through to the really interesting, exciting part of woodland creation. Just before we start, we're going to do a quick poll which will pop up in front of you to rate your knowledge at the start of the webinar, and we'll repeat that again at the end of the webinar. Just really quick, out of stars, how are you feeling about it before and after? It's really helpful for us to be able to gauge the kind of usefulness of these webinars for you. So if you could click that, that's fantastic. We'll use the question and answer function today to try and collate questions. So you can find that right at the top in the middle of your screen, just next to the chat function. Feel free to put any questions in there. We've got a range of Forestry Commission colleagues that will join us and try and answer those. We will pick out some of the top voted ones and run through those at the end of the webinar. So please do use that upvote function if there's questions in there that you'd really like to draw our attention to. And as I mentioned right at the start, if you do have any technical issues, feel free to flag those in the chat. I'm not seeing any problems, so hopefully everyone's can see and hear us well, but if you do have any problems, let us know, or try and just leave and rejoin, and that tends to solve things for Microsoft Teams. So where are we in our woodland creation timeline? Well, we started this series of webinars in National Tree Week, which signifies the start of the tree planting season in November. And this year's tree planting season will rapidly be upon us again. So we tend to say that between November and March is our kind of primary planting season, but with the weather we've been having, March is looking drier and drier. So the earlier in that season, the better. We are today on our third one of these webinars in the series. You can see events 1 and 2 on our YouTube channel if you haven't already. And we're going to be focusing on getting the trees in the ground. So I will, without too much more from me, I will hand over to some of our speakers. So we're joined today by Mark Outhwaite, Louise Alexander, and Shaun Purkiss-McEndoo, who I'm very grateful for. Going to run through some of the things to look out for when you're trying to get trees established, and take some questions at the end. So Mark, I will hand over to you.
Thank you, Peter. Good afternoon, everyone. As Peter said, my name is Mark Outhwaite. I am acting Partnership and Expertise Manager in the Yorkshire and North East team, and I'm going to be taking you through the Delivering Your Woodland Creation project. So you might be thinking, who's going to do all this work? And this is where we can help you consider your options. So what are we going to cover? So in this presentation, we're going to cover the practical delivery aspects of woodland creation, working with contractors, managing the planting process, and working with tree nurseries. Taking these into consideration will help ensure high standards and successful establishment. So delivery options. The capital funding of a EWCO agreement has a 3-year time frame within which you can deliver your project, allowing you time to deliver your scheme once your agreement is in place, giving you the option to undertake the planting as part of a phased approach, allowing time to take account of the scale of the project, plant and contractor availability, but also leaving scope for unforeseen circumstances. So what are my options? You could choose to deliver the project in-house, ordering the trees and undertaking the planting yourself. You could seek the services of a contractor to deliver your project for you. Or you may want to use a community group or volunteer to help you deliver your woodland creation project. So in-house versus outsourcing. Now, this is largely dependent on your circumstances and preferences. It is different for each site. The decision may come down to availability, whether that's labour, trees, machinery, expertise required, and cost effectiveness. So the benefits of working with a contractor. They have the skills and experience in delivering woodland creation projects, whether it is site preparation, planting the trees, and ensuring effective establishment. They understand the requirements of the England Woodland Creation Grant Offer any permits or regulatory requirements. And they have access to machinery and skilled labour and can project manage, ensuring quality control along the way. Above all else, they can ensure that your project is delivered in accordance with industry standards in the form of the UK Forestry Standard. So finding a contractor. You can do this by contacting your local Forestry Commission office and asking to speak with your local woodland officer or woodland creation officer. They may provide you with a number of contractors, contacts for either forestry contractors or forestry companies that you can contact. You could speak to other woodland owners or those that have created woodlands recently. And there may be woodland groups in your area that can help identify local forestry companies and contractors also. So working with tree nurseries. A requirement for EWCO scheme is that your stock must be sourced from a Plant Healthy certified nursery. If you're not sure on where to start with this, simply search Plant Healthy certification scheme. On the Plant Healthy website, you'll be able to find a list of certified nurseries. Think ahead, work out the plants you'll need for your project, and inquire with the nursery if they have the available stock and at the time you're likely to need them. Things to consider when ordering your stock. Size of planting stock, and this can vary depending on your project. Your nursery can help guide you as to the size of stock to consider. Bare root or cell-grown stock. Bare root, generally lifted from around November, weather permitting. They're best planted as soon as possible on receipt of the plants. To keep the bare root plants healthy, you can heel them in. And this is done by digging a small trench, laying the roots in the trench and backfilling the soil onto the roots. This will give you more time in which to complete your planting. Cell-grown trees. These are trees grown in individual containers or trays of compost cells. An advantage of cell-grown is that they can extend the planting season, both at the beginning and the end of the season. And they're a useful option if you're planning on undertaking the planting yourself, as they will allow you time to spread the planting across the season. If your creation site is close to an existing conifer woodland, you may want to consider treated stock to combat the threat from weevils. The nursery or woodland officer will be able to advise. Ask the nursery if the plants have been treated with mycorrhizal fungi. It's not essential, but there's developing evidence that treated trees with mycorrhizal fungi perform better in establishments. And finally, provenance of trees. You might want to use stock from locally sourced seed. Alternatively, you may want to use stock from more southerly provenance as part of a resilience measure in your scheme. The important part is choosing the right tree for your soil type. So the delivery of trees and things to consider once you've decided your planting stock. When will you need them delivered? And will this be as one single order or in batches? What is the access like to your planting site? Will an off-road vehicle be needed? Do you have space to store the plants and heel them in if necessary? Ground preparation techniques. This is where we'll have a look at preparing your site for planting and considerations around ground preparation and cultivation. A good idea before planting is to cut the vegetation on site. The vegetation can either be removed or mulched. Alternatively, you could graze with livestock to bring any vegetation down to a short sward. You'll find it easier to cultivate and plant on a site that has a shorter vegetation. If you're planning on using natural colonisation as your preferred method, you may want to consider animals to do some light cultivation, which will allow seeds better access to the soil. And should bracken be a problem on your site, there's support in EWCO to undertake bracken management in advance of planting as well. In advance of planting as well as follow-up treatments. So cultivation techniques. The key to delivering the correct cultivation on your site is knowing your soil type. Getting it wrong can cause enhanced weed growth, water pollution caused by increased sediment runoff, damaged soil structure, leaching of nutrients and contaminants, and release of greenhouse gases. But equally, getting it right will give your trees the best possible start, while at the same time protecting soil, water, and retaining nutrients on your site. The least intensive, most appropriate cultivation method should be used. You can identify your soil type by using Landis, but we always recommend taking a spade out to your site, digging some soil pits to get the true results. So cultivation, or methods of cultivation. So on this slide, we've got ripping. Ripping will break up any compaction and pans within the soil structure. Scarifying, and this picture shows patch scarification, and this involves the removal of turf. The planting position will be in the area of exposed soil. Scarification can be undertaken in different forms. The main aim is to expose the mineral soil. If you're thinking of natural colonisation as your chosen method for establishment, there's support for scarification within EWCO. Hinge mounding. So soil is dug from the ground, creating a mound, and the planting position will be on the created mound. And finally, inverted mounding. Soil from a pit is extracted, inverted, and returned to the same hole. This method breaks up compaction and any pans within the soil structure. However, if you have a small site and don't have access to machinery, hand screefing is an option. And this involves removing the surface vegetation with your spade, approximately 30 centimetres in size, to provide a weed-free area in which to plant into. Further guidance on cultivation compliance in England can be found in Operations Note 53, and we would recommend that you read this to help determine the most appropriate cultivation method for your site. If you're considering registering your project with the Woodland Carbon Code, it's worth running your chosen cultivation method through the calculator. The cultivation method is a key component of the carbon calculations. So site and tree protection. Deer present a significant challenge to woodland creation, and there are 6 types of deer within the UK. We've got red, roe, fallow, muntjac, Chinese water deer, and sika. You can find out which deer are present in your area by running your project through the Forestry Commission Land Information Search. How to do this was demonstrated in our earlier webinar, First Steps Towards Woodland Creation. Your local woodland officer or woodland creation officer can helps you in identifying the deer threat and suggest options to protect your trees. While deer are a main threat, please also consider rabbits, hares, and voles, as they can equally do damage to young trees. Tree protection. There are varying types of tree protection, depending on the browsing threats to your new planting. Section 6 in the EWCO application form lists the available guarding options. Not only do guards protect trees from browsing pests, but they're also useful in identifying locations of trees for future management. In the next slide, I'm going to take you through a selection of tree shelters available. So we have here spiral and vine guard wrap protection. They generally come in sizes of around 0.6 metres and 0.75 metres, and these are ideal for protecting trees from rabbits, hares, and voles. Tree shelter sizes, well, they come in a range of sizes, with 1.2 metre shelters recommended for most deer species. You may need 1.5 or 1.8 metre shelters where red deer are present, but your woodland creation officer and woodland officer can help advise you when choosing correct shelters. Alternatively, you could use deer fencing, and this can be accompanied with rabbit netting along the base of the fence. It's important that your deer fence is erected correctly, as deer can squeeze through some narrow gaps, and rabbit fencing should be dug into the ground. EWCO can support deer, rabbit, and stock fencing within the grant agreement. And finally, the planting season. Finally, ensure you have your EWCO agreement in place before commencing operations. Plan when you're going to undertake fencing and ground preparation in advance of receiving the trees. The planting season is late autumn to early spring, typically November through to March. Ensure you plan your tree order with the nurseries in good time. And finally, work closely with your woodland officer or woodland creation officer to help you build and develop your project. So thank you very much. I'm going to pass you across to Louise.
Thank you, Mark. So I'm Louise Alexander. I'm an Incentives Development National Team Manager for the EWCO, the England Woodland Creation Offer and the Woodland Creation Planning Grant. Been asked to talk to you today about the EWCO grant scheme. So the slides I'll cover are specific to EWCO. I have colleagues with me who will be helping out in the chat. So I have Cameron Austin, who is also an Incentives Development National Team Manager for EWCO and WCPG. And I have Ollie Thompson with me, who is one of our operational delivery managers for EWCO. So the agreement starts when the grant offer is signed and returned to us. Capital funding period then begins and runs for a maximum of 3 years. This can be shorter if you complete your work before the 3 years, and that's then followed by a 15-year maintenance period. If your agreement includes the additional contribution for recreational access, permissive access must be maintained with associated signage for 30 years, starting from the date that the final capital claim is made. So your agreement's made up of terms and conditions, grant offer letter, the final version of the application form and the agreement maps, any supplementary forms, if they've been needed. That could be a natural colonisation site assessment, could be one of the other additional forms that we use. There'll also be the acceptance letter that you'll need to sign. That forms part of the agreement. And it's also worth noting that the current version of the gov.uk pages at the time of you signing your agreement also form part of that agreement. So it's really important to read through these documents before you sign to make sure that the finer details are correct. So the agreement principles. Work must be completed in line with the agreement. Any agreements must be requested and any amendments must be requested and approved by us before the work is complete. You mustn't start work before the agreement is in place. We can't pay for work that's completed outside of the agreement, and you must keep a record of invoices and receipts for the duration of your agreement and the 7 years following the life cycle of that grant. So this slide just shows you the payments that are available under EWCO. You've got standard cost items, which support capital items and activities to establish new woodland. You've got actual costs. Now, these are a contribution towards the cost of installing infrastructure to enable current or future management or to provide recreational access. The additional contributions are paid where the location and the design of the woodlands will bring additional environmental and social benefits. Low sensitivity land payments are where the proposal falls within a low sensitive area for woodland creation. And the annual maintenance payments, they're paid in the autumn of each year for 15 years, and they support the establishment of young trees once the capital works are completed. So we support capital work through standard cost for items and activities to create the woodland, and then actual costs which contribute to infrastructure to manage the woodland and provide access. So both standard cost items and actual costs sit under that umbrella of capital work. Standard cost items will be applied for everybody applying for the EWCO grant. The other payments are optional. Okay. So your standard cost items will be listed in section 6 of your application form if you need to refer back to them. There is more information regarding standard cost items on the gov.uk EWCO pages. We do aim to be less prescriptive than some of the other grants, and the specifics on what standard cost items are suitable and how they should be installed can be discussed with your woodland officer, or as it's often site specific. And there's more information available on our technical guides, UKFS technical guides. So, amending your EWCO agreement. Amendments can be simple, could be a change of address or contact number, and most of those very simple amendments can be handled by email, or they could be more complex, where the amendment changes the ownership, design, or size of the woodland. There's lots of information available on the gov.uk pages, but it's also worth you checking in with the EWCO Ops Delivery team just to double check what type of amendment it is before you go off and start filling in these forms, just to save you the time and understand what it is that you need to do. So any amendment must be requested by the agent or the agreement holder in writing or by email. And if agreed, amendments will be offered by us in writing and must be formally accepted by the agreement holder. For more complex amendments, we require the amendment request form, and where ownership or management control is changing, there'll be a change of management control notification form that must be submitted. But as I say, do check in with the EWCO team just to make sure you've got the right form, and we can answer any other questions if needs be. Okay, so we can't increase grant funds through an amendment once an agreement's been offered, and the agreement must remain viable and eligible. So a new boundary, changes to open space, standard cost items, stocking density or species composition can all affect eligibility. And that's particularly the case with some of the additional contributions. So we'll check through this eligibility at the time that you submit an amendment request. Mark mentioned this in his presentation before mine. You can claim multiple times within the capital funding period. It has to be for a minimum of £5,000. So it means you can plan your work and do it in instalments. You can only claim for work that's been completed and that you have invoices for. You must submit a declaration form alongside each claim form and ensure that all capital work is complete within the 3 years. You then have an additional 3 months if needed at the end of your 3-year capital funding period to submit your final claim if you need that extra time. So for claims, we generally we pay claims within 30 working days from receiving a valid claim. Timeframes can increase to 90 working days where an inspection is undertaken. Additional contributions and low sensitivity land payments are paid automatically with the final claim. And the final capital claim also triggers those first payments of the annual maintenance. We send an end of capital funding letter after we've paid your final claim, just to confirm. Forms are available again on our gov.uk EWCO pages. Always explain to us if there's a difference between your claim form and your application form. Just let us know and explain why there are differences. Again, you must have evidence to support claims. So this is invoices, receipts, bank statements and photos. You don't need to submit evidence for standard cost items and activities with your claim, but you should retain that evidence. And it might be asked for during an inspection. And remember, it's not just for standard cost items, but it could be other costs that you've incurred, such as labour costs. You might have timesheets available that relate to that labour that's been undertaken. You also need to retain details of your tree supplier and evidence that the supplier met the biosecure procurement requirements at the time of planting. So really important that you can refer back to that, because that situation could change over time. You'll need to submit an evidence of expenditure form to support infrastructure costs if they're included in your agreement. So for infrastructure costs, we do need to see those receipts. Again, receipts, invoices, and photos. If the information isn't available, you must fill in, sign, and submit a EWCO evidence declaration form just to explain why you don't have those receipts available. So annual maintenance. Payments are made each autumn. We do need to have received your final capital claim by the 31st of August, and that needs to be a valid claim. And when I say valid, it means it has all the information that we need. So if we receive that by the 31st of August, you should receive your annual maintenance payment for the first year that year in the autumn. If you opt out of annual maintenance payments, you are still expected to maintain the woodland for the duration of the agreement. Okay. So inspections. We may inspect the site to check that the claim is valid and the work has been completed satisfactorily and in line with the agreement. You will be notified if an inspection is required, and you'll receive a copy of the inspection report. You can be there when the inspection is carried out, but you don't have to be. Finally, please do let us know if you encounter any problems, any difficulties at all. It's really much better if you reach out to us and contact us as soon as possible. Earlier, the better. And we always try to find a remedial action rather than a reclaim. Okay. I think I'm all done. I'm going to pass you over to Shaun now.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for the invitation to speak this afternoon. Obviously, I'm a head forester on a private estate in the top end of North Yorkshire near Richmond. Been here all my working life, just tipped in 47 years, to be honest. So, yeah, a long time I've been here. On our estate, notionally about 300 hectares of woodland, and around about 150 hectares of productive woodland, and it's about 50-50 in that respect of woodland that we've got on the estate. And over the last 20 years, we've created just over 100 hectares of new woodland on the estate, which has been mainly additionality, areas that join onto other woodland areas that were either not in the agricultural loop, or they were part of an old shooting system or whatever, but we took them back into, and we've planted those up. And the biggest area of woodland that we've got on the right there, which is Silver Hill, we planted in 2019. It's about 48 hectares of land, which we negotiated, taking that back in onto the state ownership fully, and turn that into a productive woodland, which is now reaching its 5th year since it was planted, 2019-2020 planting year. Right, on to the exciting part of what we've been discussing this morning. This is a live scheme that we've just implemented this year into a valley. Again, additionality is basically widening the total woodland area that follows the stream down, that's in the centre of the woodland that you can see there. So practical tips that we've done, we've basically straightened up or moved the fencing out slightly to make these compartments around the edge and give us a greater amount of woodland within that whole total area. So the most important thing I can say from that slide there is that the fencing that we put in, and we've now reduced the field size for on the critical that people get that fence line where it's supposed to be. So you need some GPS. You need to make sure that your contractor doesn't put the fence line in the wrong place, and then at some point somebody comes along and says you've either taken too much of that field, and it becomes an issue that maybe you have to go backwards to. So making sure that fence line is on the line that it's been agreed is pretty critical before they even put a post into the ground. Right, access to the site on the top left-hand side there. On Silver Hill, we put over 700 metres of new wood forest road into the site before we even planted it. That there is there, and we wouldn't have been able to manage that site going forward in the planting phase, the fencing stage, or anything. And now we're 5-6 years into its growing profile, we can still get into the site 12 months of the year without causing any ground damage. So consider access is pretty much the important factor, and whether you put that in to begin with or you don't. Fencing, again, I've talked about fencing where it needs to be. It needs to be on the line and that you're going to put it on, and your stock fencing or deer fencing that you're going to put up is done to the specification that's been previously spoken about in that situation. Right, bare root versus cell grown. Okay, we've got bare root season is getting shorter and shorter. The lifting and the grading of the trees, I'm finding that most of the nurseries are struggling to get trees into people into December now. There's no frost in the autumn to make the trees go dormant, so that is a little bit of a problem going forward. So we tend to start the season on beat up with some cell grown and finish the season on cell grown again. But sometimes you can, if you're planting with a lot of guards, cell grown go easier into guards than some bare root. Just you've got to pick your size that you're going to go with that will fit into the guards that you're going to use. Stakes and guards. Right, I would say for definite that you must, when you're ordering your stakes and your guards, allow 10% extra stakes to come with the guards to allow for breakages and then further maintenance going forward, because you will break some, you know, either in handling or when you start knocking them into the ground. So that is critical that you have some spare, so you're not looking for them at the end of the day. Handling them, the packs don't want thrown around and the stakes don't want throwing about. And sometimes we've used a fencing bar to start the guide hole for the stake, so you can maximize the driving height. So you push those stakes in to the full length that they can go. So you've got about 50 millimeters above the top zip tie of your tube, so you can get that strength in the stake without breaking it or leaving it to wobble in the wind going forward. The guards, again, choose your guards wisely. Some of the mesh ones that you might use with just 2 canes may not survive in a windy situation going forward, so make sure you choose the guard that can suit your climate, where you're positioned in the job in the landscape, so you can get those stakes that are going to be serviceable to you, and don't make sure that you've then got a lot of remedial maintenance on those guards going forward. These releasable zip ties on them is quite good. When you do maintenance, you can come along and release the ties, lift the guard up slightly and pull out any grass that's in amongst the trees. They're really handy from that point of view. Again, like I said, on the 10% extra on the stakes, you might want to make sure that you've got plenty of zip ties kicking around, so that if there are any breakages or snaps or some of them come away, you've always got that. Somebody can go around and put those back in for you. So that's another important factor in how you manage it. We also have considered in the last couple of years is putting some of the marking the site out with the stakes before the winter. If you've got a really difficult site to get to in the heat of the winter, where you've got to walk in, you can't get vehicles too close to it, then getting amongst it in the late summer, early autumn, getting your stakes delivered and then marking your site out, driving those stakes down to the required height, ready for the planting season, it will help you, especially if labour is tight, so you're not having to do everything at the same time, and then you have to do a lot of walking around where you might not get a vehicle or even a quad onto the site because of the ground that you're working on. So you might consider sticking those stakes into the ground, driving them in, and you could then consider spot spraying if that was something you were considering doing, or at least trimming the grass to a heavy sod, light sod, so you can get those ready for planting when you do get your trees in December, January or February. All you've got to do then is walk into the site with bags of trees and bags of tubes, and you're good to go, and you can foreshorten your planting period from that point of view. The overheads pictures of the site that we created. You can see the fence lines, you can see the rows of trees. We went maximise the amount of trees per hectare on that planting scheme. We've left some rides for getting alongside it for maintenance. We even put some gates into the new fence line, so we can get through from the existing woodland out into the grass field for maintenance and any vermin control that the keeper that can do that. So one other thing that I do consider is an option for people is the voles really can cause you a lot of problems when the trees are younger. And you might think, oh, I've got the tubes on them, I've got the guards on them, but we are seeing more regularly now in certain areas hotspots of voles coming in and ringbarking the young trees, and that's the end of them. So you may want to keep an eye on that situation, and then if you have to, you go and add a vole guard to some of these trees, especially in certain areas. And that's another area where you should maybe trim any grass or vegetation around those tubes really tight to the ground, so that the opportunity for those voles to be picked off by owls and birds of prey might well be more applicable for that. Right, we're moving on to question and answers from there. I'm hoping that there's somebody else who's going to pick up on that.
Yeah, I will do, Shaun. Thank you very much. Really helpful presentation there. And we've got a couple of questions in the Q&A. Do please take some time to pop a question in there if you have any, and we'll try and get to those. I was just going to take a chair's privilege to start with, to be honest, and ask maybe Shaun and perhaps Mark from the outset. You know, we're all aware of how warm it is over the last week or so. You know, what can people really do to sort of minimise tree death when they're planting? You know, we're going to have sort of longer, drier summers. We talked about tree planting season. What could you give sort of maybe one top tip that people can do when trying to plant trees to make sure that they establish and grow well? We should come to Shaun first.
Yeah, I think there's a school of thought that, from my point of view, is that sometimes ring spraying and creating like a brown earth with no vegetation on around the tree is sometimes not the best situation. It allows then the sun to bake the soil and crack it and draw out the moisture. Having a trimmed grass sward that's maybe only 50 mil off the ground might just hold a bit more moisture in that situation, rather than creating a brown ring around the tree. You're only looking for like the maximum, like a dustbin lid around the tree, and a little bit of vegetation on the side of it will stop the wind or the breeze or the sunshine getting to those trees. So if you can focus on that, and maybe a little less chemical early season, you might hold the moisture that you have and not go for that situation. Because on the flip side, where if you have got a brown surface that's no vegetation at all, sometimes in the winter, if you get heavy frost or snow, the rabbit population seem to know that they can come straight up and they dig underneath the tubes as well, which in certain hills and certain sites is another problem that people have seen.
Fantastic, thanks, Shaun. Mark, what about you? What would be the latest that you would suggest planting? I suppose bare root and cell grown. Conscious you're both quite northern. I'm right down in the south of the country, so this does vary as you go up and down, obviously.
I think as we've mentioned, we're all very mindful that the planting season seems to be getting shorter, and we've had quite a few dry springs. So I think a combination of things, obviously what Shaun has mentioned there, but you know, trying to get your trees planted as early as possible when the window opens, and use of cell grown stocks to sort of extend the planting season is probably just as good as any advice at the moment. Thanks, Peter.
Excellent. Thanks, Mark. Okay, so moving on to questions in the Q&A and chat. There's one, Shaun, for you. Just to, could you elaborate on the use of cable ties with the guards and stakes a bit for people that perhaps aren't familiar?
Yeah, well, most tubes come with 2 zip ties or 1 zip tie on them, and which is just a black cable tie basically that goes around the post and you pull it up tight. So there is breakages on those, some snap. Occasionally you'll find that for whatever reason there isn't one in the roll of tubes, so having some spare in the planting bag or available to whoever's doing the maintenance is another consideration. And then I like the releasable ones where possible, that you can, if you're going to come round and do some hand weeding, you can physically release the tie, lift the tube up the stake, and then hand pull out any heavy grasses that are growing inside the tube, and then place the tube back down and pull the tie back again. Excellent,
thank you. And the next one from Rosie. Shaun, I'll come to you, and then maybe Mark, if you want to chip in on this one as well. Do you have any experience or advice for using non-plastic tree guards? Conscious that plastic tree guards can break down, and we're all aware of microplastics and plastic in the environment. So, Shaun, any experience from you, and then Mark, perhaps a comment on that?
Well, I think that's obviously we're becoming more conscious of what we use and how things have been put into planting schemes. So it's a bit of a personal choice. I think in some respects the support they have to use biodegradable tubes, and they are getting better. And there now support for recycling of tubes going forward as well. So it's not the end of the day if you do use certain plastic tubes. But I think it's down to whoever's creating the woodland as how they decide which tube they want to use. I think the best tube for your situation in the landscape, if it's going to be windy, sometimes the solid tubes, you can now get some of them that are slightly vented. They're like a perforation. It just lets a little bit of the worst of the breeze go through it. So they're really attractive in certain positions. So I think it is something that's become more conscious. And it's all down to personal choice, I think.
Yeah, and I really liked as well in your presentation, you were really clear to highlight that you've invested now in that access and in leaving that space around the woodland so you can get in and manage it in future, and that's so critical. You know, we can't plant and forget. You know, it's not a put the tree in the ground and leave it there forever. It's a put the tree in the ground and maintain it, and that might involve gathering. Well, it should involve gathering the guards back and recycling them as well. Sorry, Mark, I'll move us on to another question for you instead, which was, what are the options for looser or more natural planting regimes, especially for broadleaf establishment? So perhaps a comment there on some straight lines.
Sorry, go on, Shaun.
Yeah, I think obviously when you're planting in straight lines, it's easier to maintain because you follow the rows and you're quicker over the ground. When you've got a random planting or you're in group planting, you have to then sort of maybe either somehow use a dye within any sprays that you use, so you don't do them twice. You may have to carry a wax crayon so you can mark the top of the post to know that you've been anywhere near it. Things like that you can do, but it is a little bit more intensive on the maintenance side if you are doing that. But it's down to the scheme that you're putting forward. We generally go with the 2,500 trees to the hectare schemes, but other people come down a lot less than that, and you've got more open space. So that's how you set yourself up, and then how you manage that.
Excellent, Mark. Do you want to come in a little bit on there, and then I'll come to Louise for more.
Yeah, I suppose just to add to that, it's just in terms of the grants agreement, there's no restrictions on how you design and plan your planting pattern within the EWCO grants offer. We do agree with you a stocking density per hectare, but you can pick and choose how you want to use that in terms of that planting design. And if a sort of a random planting design is what you're looking for, then we can accommodate within that grants offer. Thanks, Peter.
Thanks, Mark. And hopefully that answers the question about stocking densities in there, and that there are some minimums, but there's flexibility within that dependent on site. Louise, perhaps a question for you. Do the revenue payments or agreement rules include funds for removal and disposal of the tubes and ties?
They don't, I'm afraid, no. In terms of using plastic, we can't, the price of the plastic tubes is very often higher than the price for the biodegradable tubes is very much higher normally than the plastic tubes. We will happily pay the price of the plastic tubes, but the agreement holder would have to pay the difference. And it's really about recycling any plastic before it's released into the environment. The research that we're seeing is that for the time being, the plastic tubes are the most effective tubes. But there is still research taking place. And we hope that that will change when a more effective alternative sort of comes onto the market.
Excellent. Yeah, lots of interesting trials in that area that people can look out if they're interested there. Question from Naomi, probably for you again, Shaun, and maybe Mark, if you wanted to come in. Do you think there is benefit to inter-row mowing in years 2 or 3? It's very expensive, and in dry years, having further vegetation might retain moisture on site, ? So coming back, Shaun, I suppose, to what you were saying there about spraying and not overdoing the vegetation control to leave a bit of something, but just doing enough.
Yeah, I think I'll focus on basically the dustbin lid of circle around a tree, and the rest of it, I think it's like over gardening, over forestry in a little way. I think that if you can break the breeze with a bit of grass and stop that moisture being blown away, we're getting warm and windy summers these days, which tends to wicks the moisture away quite quickly. So anything that you can just leave the trees in a little socket of land that's got a very lower amount of vegetation around it might just hold the moisture that you're looking for until it gets itself established and can start to grow away in that landscape. But flattening everything and spraying everything, I don't think is something that we should consider. And I think we need to look at the examples of that to try and make sure that we get the maintenance right, but we don't over maintenance and create more problems out of that.
Yeah. Anything to add to that, Mark? Or
no, I'd agree with Shaun on that. I think also just to consider is just around any weeds. Obviously, we're changing the sort of the vegetation type in there. So if you're starting to get any sort of invasive weeds in there, like thistles and things that you don't want to spread across the rest of your landhold, you may want to go in occasionally to do a mow or a top, but it's just as and when required, I think, rather than routine.
Yeah, wonderful. And Mark, while you're off mute, or Shaun, to be honest, as a question, really pertinent question from Beth. Are there any tree species we should be considering potentially to replace native species that may be more resilient to hotter, drier climates? So whether you want to get into your sort of personal preferences for species, or whether you just want to talk briefly about, planting design and selecting resilience and the importance of soils, Mark.
I think that's it. I don't think I've got any particular species in mind, because it largely depends on where you are in the country, your soil type, and what your objectives are. But we do have resilience officers within the team, our woodland creation officers as well, and our woodland officers can be able to support you with that. There's also other additional tools that you can access to help with that. But the key thing is understanding your soils, knowing what your soils is, and then you can build from that in terms of the species choices and what would be successful within that environment.
Absolutely. And I'll do a quick plug, as we did in a previous webinar, for the ecological sites classification tool, which you can find online, and I'm sure we'll get a link in the chat with some quick digging and identifying your soil type. You can get some kind of suitable species suggestions from that tool there. So that in combination with a discussion with a Forestry Commission officer or professional forester is a really good way to start picking a resilient species. Louise, there was a question there for what are the options for smaller sub ½ hectare parcels? So how small can we go with EWCO parcels?
0.1 hectares. There we are.
There you go, Mark. So yeah, we can drop down to 0.1 hectares, and we can include bits of shelter belt and things like that in some of those agreements. So hopefully that answers that question. Shaun, probably there's a question there from Beth. What system do you use / recommend to mark out tree planting in straight rows this time?
We tend to use ranging poles, sort of these sort of about 1.8 metre high, sort of red and white metal ranging poles, and the guys just set them up in a row and then just move them over each time they're going up and down a row, and then it's just experience and knowledge and understanding of how you're doing that. So another thing on the side of the tree plant, if you go down the contractor route, but ultimately you might be picking up the maintenance side of it yourself by either you're doing it yourself or you know somebody that either works locally or whatever else you might want to do that, then I would say potentially engage a contractor that's quite happy to have your person in and amongst that planting contract, so they get an idea of the scheme, they know what's been planted, how it's been planted, and they can then pick up the maintenance side for you going forward, rather than going back to the contractor. They can come round, they can do the hand weeding, they can do the replacing the ties that get broken, you can inspect it for you on a regular basis, and you try and make sure that the things that might sneak up on you are not getting done, and you've got somebody either in-house or somebody locally that can do that work for you.
Excellent, thank you, Shaun. And perhaps maybe second to final question for you, could you say a bit more about guarding against voles? It sounded to Nick like you were saying using vole guards and tree shelters on the same tree, but you might have misheard. Could you just clarify that?
Yeah. It has to be a consideration, because we planted the woodland for a client this winter, and we've got a real bad spot where the voles came in and got themselves underneath the tubing, or they were pushed into the ground, and took those cell-grown trees out, and so you've got to try and make sure that you minimise that respect, especially when you've maybe bought a cell-grown tree that's cost you a fair bit of money, and so we've got to try and, even if you then got the cost of a guard and a stake, a tube, 1.2 tube, to put an extra vole guard on that inside that at maybe 25-35 pence. So it's not a great deal of cost compared to coming back 12 months later and finding it's been eaten, then you've got to buy another tree, then you've got to pay the labour. So things like that, you might just consider that or review it and put those on.
Fantastic, thank you, Shaun. I think that concludes most of the questions that are in there, or they've either been answered in writing for the more specific ones. Louise?
Hi, yeah, there's a question there from Freddie. Is the Forestry Commission looking at ways to streamline the process of underclaiming, which doesn't involve sort of amending and resubmitting annexes and maps? Unfortunately, when we undertake an amendment, we do need those documents, just as the original documents. The original agreement is formed by that list of different documents. When we process an amendment, we need those documents as well, because they form part of your new amended agreement. Having said that, please do contact us and make sure that you're only providing the information that we need. Okay, there are some thresholds for underclaims, so really worth coming to us first.
Excellent, thank you very much, Louise. So that brings us on quite nicely to some next steps. So we're going to just quickly rerun that poll that we did at the start, and hopefully you'll have picked up some helpful information and improved your knowledge as part of this webinar. That's really helpful information for us to gather. Thank you. Thank you very much to Shaun, Louise and Mark for their presentations today. And where can you go next? Well, as Mark certainly said, you can speak to your local woodland officer, your woodland creation officer. Loads of free advice and expertise within the Forestry Commission. We'd be delighted to hear from you. You can reach out via .gov.uk. There's a form on there that you can put some information in about your project, and we will get in touch with you to help make that a reality for you. or if you've got EWCO, England Woodland Creation Offer specific questions, you can email ewco@forestrycommission.gov.uk, and Louise and co will help answer your individual case questions. And of course, you can sign up to our newsletter and be alerted to webinars like this going forward, where you get the opportunity to ask questions directly. So speaking of webinars going forward, with the final event in this series, we'll have kind of done a whole tree planting season through the whole year, and we'll be talking about managing your new woodlands. So after you've got those trees in, you've got them establishing, how do you make sure that they thrive and provide all of the benefits that tree and woodland cover can do. So look out for that. It'll be 21st of October at 1 p.m. And as always, these webinars will be hosted on our YouTube channel afterwards. So thank you ever so much for joining us. Thank you again to our speakers. And we'll hopefully see you in October. Thanks all. Bye-bye.